Why do narcissists discard people? You were never the problem. You were the mirror. They didn't walk away because you were too emotional. They didn't discard you because you were too sensitive, too intense, too real. They walked away because every time they looked into your eyes, they saw a reflection they couldn't handle. You mirrored back the emptiness they were trying to hide, the truth they were running from, and the reality they refused to face. You didn't fail them, you revealed them. See, narcissists thrive in the shadows. They live behind masks, pretending to be who they think the world wants them to be. But when you stepped into their life with your authenticity, your love, your consistency, it forced a confrontation. Not with you, but with themselves, and that confrontation was unbearable. It's not that you were too much. It's that your presence made their facade start to crumble. Your loyalty, it exposed their manipulation. Your empathy, it made their coldness louder. Your transparency, it stripped away their games, every act of kindness, every attempt at real connection. It wasn't just rejected, it was feared, because the more you gave from a place of wholeness, the more obvious their brokenness became. You were the light, and they were hiding in a cave. This is the paradox that breaks hearts. You were discarded not because you were weak, but because your strength illuminated their fragility. They couldn't keep up with the depth of your love, so they devalued it. They couldn't reciprocate your truth, so they ran from it, and in their mind, running felt safer than facing the internal war that your presence triggered. You have to understand, people who are whole don't discard love. People who are healed don't abandon truth. When someone discards you like trash, it says more about their inner chaos than your worth. You didn't drive them away, their wounds did, their shame did, their fear of being truly seen did. And ironically, you were the one person who actually saw them. But narcissists don't want to be seen. They want to be admired. They want to be praised, not understood. The moment they sense you're no longer under their spell, when you're seeing the full picture instead of just their highlight reel, they panic. They don't want to be loved, they want to be worshipped. And love, real love, requires vulnerability. It demands presence, and they just can't go there. You see, the discard isn't a verdict on your value. It's evidence of their incapacity. It's not a punishment for being too much. It's a reaction to you being the wrong target for their manipulation. You're not weak for being discarded. You're powerful enough to threaten their illusion. That's the truth they hope you never figure out. Because if you believe you were the problem, you'll spend years shrinking. You'll shrink your voice, shrink your heart, shrink your expectations. You'll question everything beautiful about yourself. Your empathy, your loyalty, your openness. And try to become small enough to be loved by someone who was never capable of loving anyone, not even themselves. But the moment you wake up, really wake up, and realize you were the mirror, not the mistake, everything changes. You stop chasing closure from someone who fears clarity. You stop apologizing for being the one who loved the hardest. And you start honoring the version of you that stood tall even when your heart was breaking. Here's what you need to lock into your soul. They didn't reject you. They rejected the responsibility of being seen by you. You were never disposable. You were just too reflective, too conscious, too real. They couldn't stand in your light, so they chose the darkness they were used to. Don't mourn their absence. Celebrate your glow. Because not everyone can handle truth. Not everyone is ready for love that holds a mirror. Most want fantasy. Most want comfort. Most want a reflection that flatters, not one that exposes. You didn't lose someone who loved you. You lost someone who used you until they couldn't face their own reflection anymore. And that's liberation disguised as rejection. The discard isn't the evidence of your unworthiness. It's confirmation that your light still works. It's proof that your energy is powerful, that your presence is undeniable. You were never broken. You were breaking the illusion. You were pulling back the curtain. You were showing them that masks can't survive where love lives. And now that you know this, you reclaim your power. You stop asking why they left, and you start recognizing why they had to. You became too true for their false world. You became too awake for their sleepwalking. You didn't fit into the script because you were writing your own story, and they couldn't control the narrative anymore. You didn't lose something sacred. You dodged something toxic. You didn't get discarded by someone better. You were released by someone who couldn't keep up. Now the real work begins. Now you rebuild. Not from a place of pain, but from power. Not to prove anything to them, but to remember everything about you. Because here's what no narcissist wants you to know. The mirror they smashed still holds the truth. And the truth is, you are whole, worthy, radiant, and rising. You are not the discarded. You are the survivor of someone who couldn't handle your reflection. You were the mirror, and now it's time to reflect your light inward and rise. The discard is not an ending. It's a strategy when a narcissist discards you. It feels like the floor just vanished beneath your feet. One moment, they're holding you close, whispering lies wrapped in affection. The next, you're standing in the silence, wondering what went wrong. But let's call this out for what it really is. This wasn't love gone wrong. This was manipulation by design. It wasn't an emotional collapse. It was a power move. The discard, it's not closure, it's control. The narcissist doesn't discard to end things. They discard to see what you'll do. Will you chase them? Will you beg? Will you tear yourself apart, asking what you did wrong? That's the test. That's the trap. And too many people fall into it, thinking it was about the relationship, about love, about incompatibility. But this wasn't about love. This was about dominance, about keeping you small, about keeping you hooked. You have to understand, the discard is the ultimate bait. When a narcissist cuts you off, blocks you, ghosts you, or leaves you suddenly, they're not leaving for peace. They're creating chaos. Because in that chaos, they hold the upper hand. While you spiral, they feed. While you suffer, they feel superior. It's a twisted game, but to them, it's a tactic. And they've played it before. You're not the first. But you can be the last. This is where your power begins, not in the apology you never got, not in the explanation they never gave, but in the realization that this was a strategy, not a reflection of your value. The discard is crafted to leave you bleeding emotionally, so you'll return just to stop the pain. But here's the secret they don't want you to know. Your healing is their worst nightmare. Your silence is louder than your pain. Because the moment you stop playing their game, they lose control. When you stop reacting, stop chasing, stop asking why, you strip them of their power. The discard only works if you believe it's the end. But what if it's not the end? What if it's the turning point? What if it's the moment you rise, stronger than ever, because you've finally seen the mask fall? The truth is, narcissists discard when they think they've drained your emotional fuel. When they believe you've got nothing left to give, and instead of owning that they've destroyed something beautiful, they spin it. You were too needy, too emotional, too intense. Lies, smoke, deflection. But if you zoom out, you'll see this was all orchestrated to protect their ego from collapse. The discard isn't just about pushing you away. It's about watching you break and feeding on your response. That's why they often come back later. That's why they resurface just when you start to heal, because the discard wasn't closure. It was a test of your boundaries, and if you let them back in, they'll tighten the leash. You weren't rejected, you were tested. Now it's time to pass the test, and passing the test doesn't mean becoming cold. It doesn't mean becoming them. It means standing so firmly in yourself, worth that no discard can define you. It means recognizing manipulation for what it is. It means drawing a line so deep in the sand that even your shadow won't cross it, because you're not here to be someone's emotional puppet. You're here to be free. You see, they count on your confusion. They count on your silence. They count on your craving for closure. But here's the truth. You don't need their closure when you have your clarity. The discard was never a reflection of who you are. It was a reflection of how threatened they were by your growing strength. When they realized they couldn't fully own you, they discarded you to reset the game, but you're not playing anymore, and here's where the shift happens. The discard is the fork in the road. You can spiral, or you can stand. You can beg, or you can build. You can collapse, or you can claim your crown. And the second you stop personalizing their pathology, you reclaim every ounce of your power. You begin to rise from the ashes of a strategy they used to keep you small. And you grow into someone they never saw coming. They thought the discard would break you. They thought it would silence you. But what if it wakes you up? What if it becomes the catalyst for your transformation? Because here's the truth they'll never admit. The one they discarded is the one who held the power all along. And when that person wakes up, there's no going back. You now see the discard for what it is. A strategy designed to shake you. But instead of shaking, you're stepping into your highest self. You're seeing the patterns, the manipulation, the gaslighting, and you're choosing to walk a different path. Not one of revenge, but of rebirth. Not one of bitterness, but of breakthrough. Because you were never meant to live at the mercy of someone else's emotional warfare. You were meant to live in truth, in freedom, in power. And now the discard has served its true purpose. It revealed the player, it unmasked the illusion, it opened the door, and you're walking through it. Head high, heart strong, soul unshaken. The discard was not the end of your story. It was the beginning of the one you write on your own terms. You don't need their approval. You don't need their explanation. You need you. And now that you've got that back, there's no limit to how high you'll rise. Not despite the discard, but because of it. They fear what they can't control, let's be clear. Narcissists don't fall in love. They attach, and when they attach, it's not to connect. It's to control, it's to consume. It's to conquer. They don't bond with your soul. They bind your freedom. So when you finally start choosing yourself, when you stop dancing to their emotional rhythm, when you stand tall and say no more, that's when they hit the panic button. That's when they discard. Not because you're broken, but because you're breaking free. You were never supposed to have boundaries in their world. You were supposed to say yes when they said jump. You were supposed to absorb their rage, heal their wounds, cater to their ego, all without asking for anything real in return. But the moment you began to remember who you are, the moment you started setting standards, speaking truth, and reclaiming your identity, you became a threat, not to their love, because they never truly loved you, but to their illusion of control. You need to see the discard not as abandonment, but as an eviction notice from a power structure you were no longer subscribing to. They didn't leave you, they lost control of you, and that made them furious, that made them scared. You weren't docile anymore. You weren't feeding the addiction anymore. You were unplugging from their chaos, and they can't survive without control. You turned the lights on and they ran. This is the moment you have to flip the script. What looks like rejection is often self-preservation on their part. They see the storm coming, not around them, but within them. Because when they lose control of someone they used to manipulate, they're forced to confront something they've been running from their entire life, their own emptiness, and they can't do that. So they discard instead. They need control like oxygen. If they can't control your emotions, they'll control your perception. If they can't control your perception, they'll control the narrative. And if they can't control the narrative, they'll disappear entirely and tell the world you were crazy, clingy, or unstable. But the real truth, you started to see through the smoke. You stopped being the puppet. You stopped being their echo, and that scared them more than anything else ever could. Because once a narcissist loses control, they spiral. They can't handle being irrelevant. They can't handle being exposed, and nothing exposes them more than a person who was once under their thumb, standing up and thriving without them. You stopped reacting. You stopped needing. You stopped asking them to validate your worth. And in that moment, they realized they lost the very power they built their identity on. This is why so many discards happen after you start growing. It's not a coincidence. It's a reaction. The more you evolve, the more you step into awareness, the more uncomfortable they become, because their tactics stop working. Their manipulation loses traction. Their dominance begins to slip, And rather than face the pain of being powerless, they cut the cord. But it's not you they're running from. It's the truth you carry, and that truth is dangerous to their dysfunction. Because your clarity reveals their chaos. Your healing exposes their harm. Your self-love makes their dependency stand out like a spotlight. So instead of rising with you, they discard you, hoping to regain control elsewhere. Hoping to find someone less aware, someone more vulnerable, someone easier to manage. But that's not your concern. You've outgrown the role they cast you in. You don't owe anyone your silence just to keep their insecurities comfortable. You don't owe anyone your obedience just to feel wanted. If someone discards you when you begin to love yourself, that is not rejection. It is confirmation. Confirmation that your light is real, your power is rising, and their grip is gone. You're no longer fuel for their ego. You've become a force they cannot manipulate. This is where your next level begins, when you stop mourning the loss of someone who feared your independence and start celebrating the return of your own authority. You were never designed to be someone's emotional hostage. You were born to be sovereign. And the moment you start honoring that truth, they lose the ability to use fear as a leash. Let's be honest, this was never love. Love doesn't silence you. Love doesn't shrink you. Love doesn't discard you the moment you stop submitting. What you experienced was control wrapped in affection, approval tied to obedience, validation offered like a reward for compliance. That's not intimacy. That's emotional warfare disguised as care, and now you see it clearly. So don't mistake their exit as a loss. It was a breakthrough. You don't want to be in the orbit of someone who only values you when you're under control. You want to rise around people who can witness your power and cheer, not panic. Who can celebrate your freedom, not fear it. Who don't discard you when you grow, but grow alongside you. The discard isn't your devastation. It's your distinction. It means you crossed a line. You elevated past the point where they could hold you down. And now that you're free, now that you're conscious, now that you're untouchable, their opinion doesn't matter. Their absence doesn't sting. Their silence doesn't scare you, because you've remembered what they hoped you'd forget. You were always the power in the room. You're not here to be managed. You're not here to be controlled. You're here to expand, to rise, to blaze trails they'll never walk. So let them discard you. Let them run. Let them spin their story. You don't need to correct the narrative when you're busy creating a new chapter. One where you are no longer afraid to be free. You weren't discarded because you were too much. You were discarded because you were too awake to be controlled. And now that you're awake, nothing can put you back to sleep. The discard is a mirror of their inner void. When a narcissist discards someone, it's not about that person's lack, it's about their own emptiness. It's not about what you failed to give, it's about what they were never capable of receiving. See, narcissists don't discard because you're broken. They discard because they are. And the deeper you dig into that truth, the more you realize you were never the problem. You were the reflection they couldn't stand to face. They walk around like they have it all together, grandiose, charming, charismatic. But underneath that armor of ego is a child stuck in survival mode, terrified of being exposed, rejected, or seen without the mask. You didn't hurt them by being too emotional or too intense. You hurt them by holding up a mirror that revealed their cracks. Your authenticity made their emptiness unbearable, so they ran, not from you, but from their own reflection. The discard is a smokescreen. It's not closure. It's not truth. It's a cover-up for the fact that they've hit their limit. They've taken what they could, drained what they needed, and now they're exposed. And instead of staying and growing, instead of taking responsibility or showing humility, they choose the easy route, disappear, deflect, and destroy, because facing themselves would mean facing decades of avoidance. And narcissists, they don't do accountability, they do escape. They don't discard because they've outgrown you. They discard because you were starting to grow. and that growth highlighted their own stagnation. You see, a healthy person can celebrate another's evolution. A narcissist sees it as a threat. Yourself. Love felt like judgment to them. Your boundaries felt like betrayal. Your refusal to be controlled. That was the final straw. Not because you hurt them, but because you revealed how little they've grown. And that's the most tragic part, because many of them truly believe they're superior. They walk into relationships wearing confidence like a crown, but behind that posture is a void so deep, so consuming, that they need constant admiration just to feel okay. The discard isn't just a rejection, it's a survival tactic. They discard so they don't drown in their own inadequacy. They push you away before you see them fully, because deep down they fear if you really saw them, you'd run first. But here's the kicker, you did see them. You saw the pain behind the pride, you saw the vulnerability hiding beneath the rage, you saw the brokenness they tried to mask with blame and bravado, and instead of running, you stayed, you loved them anyway. You gave more than they ever earned, you showed up with real empathy, real compassion, real connection, and in return you got discarded, not because your love wasn't enough, but because it was too much for someone so emotionally bankrupt. So the discard isn't a statement about your worth, it's a confession about theirs. It says, I can't meet you at that level. It says, I'd rather destroy what's real than face my fear of not being enough. It says, your light is too bright for the shadow I live in. And in that moment, they reveal not just their fear, but their limits, their emotional ceiling, their inability to grow, expand, or elevate alongside someone who loves without agenda. And you were ready for more. You were ready to build, to heal, to connect on a soul, deep level. You wanted truth, not tactics, love, not leverage, partnership, not power struggles. But you were dealing with someone incapable of meeting you there. They didn't want a mirror, they wanted a servant, someone who reflected their fantasies, not their flaws. So when you stepped into your truth, they saw their lies, and when you stepped into your power, they saw their weakness. That's when they bailed. They'll blame you, of course, say you were too much, say you changed, say you became cold, distant, demanding, but don't fall for that rewrite. That's not truth. That's projection. That's them throwing their inner chaos at you, hoping you'll carry the shame they don't want to face. But it's not yours. Don't pick it up, drop it, let it fall, let it burn, because here's the truth they don't want you to realize. You never needed them to complete you. You thought you did. You tried to. You bent and broke trying to be enough. But now you see clearly, you were always enough. They just didn't have the capacity to receive it. Their void wasn't your responsibility to fill. Their discard wasn't your failure to prevent. You were the light they couldn't contain, the love they couldn't return, the depth they couldn't swim, and instead of growing deeper they ran, because they weren't ready. Maybe they never will be, but that's not your story anymore. That's theirs. Let them write it alone. You've got a new chapter to create. One where your love isn't weaponized, your truth isn't punished, and your presence isn't discarded like yesterday's trash. The discard might have felt like the end, but it was actually your rebirth, the moment the mirror shattered, and you stopped looking to them for reflection. You don't need their gaze to validate your shine. You don't need their approval to stand tall. You don't need their love to feel whole. You've got something they were never able to offer, sell, ownership, integrity, and inner peace. So let the discard be your declaration. You're done being a mirror for someone else's emptiness. You're done bending to fit into a void. You're done shrinking to avoid rejection. From this moment forward, you stand rooted in your worth, unmoved by their absence, and on fire with your truth. You became too emotionally intelligent to manipulate. There comes a moment in every survivor's journey when confusion gives way to clarity. That moment when you stop wondering, what did I do wrong? And start asking, why was I ever okay with being treated like that? That's the power of emotional intelligence. That's the shift a narcissist cannot handle. Because the second you stop reacting and start reflecting, their game is up, their power is gone, their illusion collapses. See, narcissists survive through emotional manipulation. They feed off drama, off confusion, off your need to explain yourself. They don't want communication. They want control. They don't want peace. They want compliance, but something changed in you, didn't it? You stopped playing. You started pausing before you spoke. You started listening not to their words, but to their patterns. And that's when everything started to fall apart. For them, they loved you emotional, they loved you overwhelmed because it made you easier to control. When you were reacting from pain, they could rewrite the story. When you were triggered, they could play the victim. When you were desperate, they could dangle their love like a prize, but emotional intelligence that broke the entire machine because now you weren't chasing explanations. You were watching behaviors. You weren't explaining your needs. You were enforcing your standards. They couldn't handle that shift because you stopped giving them what they needed. Your confusion, your self-doubt, your vulnerability unchecked. You stopped explaining your worth. You stopped arguing with gaslighting. You started saying, "I hear you, and I still choose me." And that was the most terrifying sentence they'd ever heard because it meant the spell was broken. Your calm started to expose their chaos. Your grounded presence started to make their emotional volatility look like exactly what it was: manipulation. You saw through the guilt trips. You recognized the silent treatments for what they were: tactics. And suddenly, their entire playbook became useless. That's when the discard usually comes, not because you failed, but because you evolved, you became unshakable, not because you stopped feeling, but because you started understanding. You saw their projections, you decoded the games, you stopped being the mirror and became the observer. You started saying, "That's your wound, not mine." And let me tell you something, narcissists can't thrive around self-aware people. They need chaos to dominate. They need ignorance to survive. You became emotionally fluent, and that fluency cut through their lies like a blade. This is what they don't tell you. Emotional intelligence is the ultimate revenge. Not screaming, not begging, not proving yourself. Just clarity, just silence, just a deep, unshakable knowing of who you are and what you're not available for anymore. That's what makes you untouchable. That's what makes you dangerous to them, because now they can't reach you where they used to. Every emotionally intelligent decision you made was a crack in their armor. Every time you stayed calm during a guilt trip. Every time you refused to justify yourself to a lie. Every time you walked away from bait. You were reclaiming space. You were reclaiming power, and they felt it. That's why they panicked. That's why they turned cruel. That's why they discarded. You were no longer fuel for their dysfunction. But here's the part that hits the hardest. They'll never admit this. They'll never say, "You grew too much for me to handle." They'll never say, "Your emotional mastery made me feel small." No, they'll spin it. They'll say you changed, you became distant, you lost your spark, because the truth is too painful for them to face. And that truth is, you grew and they refused to. And maybe for a while, you felt guilty about that. Maybe you missed the old version of you, the one who tried so hard to be understood, to be accepted, but not anymore. That version of you was surviving. This version is thriving, and you didn't lose them. They lost the version of you they could manipulate. That version is gone, forever. What you've gained is worth more than any fake connection could ever offer. You've gained discernment. You've gained clarity. You've gained a sacred understanding of what emotional safety feels like, and now you protect it fiercely. You don't explain yourself to manipulation. You don't negotiate with gaslighting. You don't engage with chaos pretending to be love. That's what emotional intelligence looks like in action. Let them call it cold. Let them call it distant. That's not your concern. You're not cold. You're clear. You're not distant. You're discerning. You don't owe access to anyone who only loved the version of you they could dominate. You're not here to be palatable. You're here to be powerful. And the next time someone tries to pull you back into those old patterns, just smile. Because now you know the game. Now you know your worth. Now you recognize the tactics for what they are, desperation disguised as love, and now you no longer need to win their approval. You've already won something bigger, yourself. So yes, they discarded you. But only because you became too emotionally intelligent to control. And that's not a loss. That's a level up. They saw you were starting to see through them. There's a moment when the fog starts to lift. It doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in like the first rays of sunlight cracking through a long, cold night. You begin noticing patterns. You start connecting dots, and suddenly the things that once confused you now make sense. The gaslighting, the projection, the guilt trips, they weren't misunderstandings, they were manipulation. And the moment a narcissist senses that you're waking up, that's the moment they prepare their exit. Not because they don't want you, but because they can't control someone who sees too clearly. In the beginning, they wore a mask, one designed exactly for you. They watched what you loved, what you craved, what you feared, and they mirrored it. They gave you just enough to hook you, to build your trust, to make you believe they were everything you were missing. That's how they trap you, with fantasy, not reality. But you started to wake up. You started noticing cracks in the mask, inconsistencies, little lies, subtle shifts, and they noticed that you noticed. The moment they realize their illusion is breaking, panic sets in, but they won't show it as fear. They'll show it as rage, coldness, indifference. They'll start picking fights, creating drama, finding faults, not because you did anything wrong, but because they need to flip the script. They need to shift the spotlight off their deception and onto your reaction. Because if you're angry, if you're defensive, if you're emotional, they can use that against you. They can say you're the problem, but deep down they're just scared. Scared that their mask is slipping and that you're starting to see the truth. And that truth is devastating for them, because once you see through a narcissist, you can't unsee it. You can't go back to pretending their love was real, that their empathy was genuine, that their connection was mutual. You see the performance. You hear the rehearsed lines. You spot the manipulation, the hooks, the control. And the moment you stop feeding into it, they know. The game is over. They can't survive in the light of your awareness. That's why the discard often feels so sudden, so brutal. One minute you're their world and the next you're trash. But that switch wasn't emotional. It was strategic. You were no longer a source of blind admiration. You were a threat, a mirror, a reminder of who they really are when they're not playing the role, and that terrifies them, so they run, not because you changed, but because you saw. You saw the contradiction between their words and actions. You saw how love was used like currency. You saw how apologies were just tools to reset the cycle. You saw that their caring was conditional. That affection only flowed when you were compliant. That vulnerability was a trap, not a connection. And they can't control someone who sees the strings behind the puppet show. But here's the kicker. They'll discard you before you have the chance to fully confront them. Not because you're weak, but because they know if they stay any longer, the entire facade will collapse. You'll have too much evidence, too much clarity, too much power, and narcissists don't stay where they don't feel superior. The second the power dynamic shifts, they cut and run, but they don't just disappear. They smear. They spin a new narrative, one where they were the victim and you were the unstable, ungrateful, dramatic one. It's not about truth, it's about control. They don't care what's real. They care what looks good. And if they can't control your perception, they'll try to control everyone else's, because your clarity is dangerous. It threatens the false image they've spent years constructing. So they'll try to destroy your credibility, not because you're wrong, but because you're right. You've become a liability. You know too much, but don't you dare shrink. Don't you dim that light. Your awareness is your liberation. Your clarity is your compass. You're not here to stay in illusions for the sake of someone else's comfort. You're here to rise, and rising means facing hard truths, seeing manipulation and calling it what it is, recognizing abuse even when it wears the mask of love. That's what makes you powerful. That's what makes you unstoppable. And I know it hurts. I know being discarded by someone you gave everything to feels like betrayal on a cellular level. But what if that discard was actually protection? What if it was the universe saying, you've seen enough. Now it's time to heal, to grow, to reclaim your truth. What if this isn't your ending? It's your awakening, because that's what's really happening here. You're awakening. You're no longer fooled by charm or trapped by hope. You're no longer bending yourself to fit someone else's fantasy. You're reclaiming your power, your voice, your worth. You're standing in truth, and nothing terrifies a narcissist more than someone who's no longer afraid to see clearly. Let them run. Let them spin. Let them rewrite. That's their story to carry. Yours is just beginning, and it's being written in bold ink, with honest lines and fierce love for yourself. You don't need to explain your clarity. You don't need to justify your intuition. You saw through the storm, and now you walk in the sun. The discard wasn't rejection. It was recognition. Recognition that your soul evolved beyond their manipulation. Recognition that you broke the spell, that you stepped out of the fog, and once you see truth, you become it. They never saw you as a person. Only a supply. Let's drop the illusion once and for all. Narcissists don't love you. Not in the way your soul deserves to be loved. Not in the way that honors your spirit, your heart, your presence. No, to them, you were never truly you. You were a reflection, a mirror, a source of supply. A character in their show, not a person with depth, with needs, with a sacred self. That's the most brutal truth, but also the most liberating, because once you realize they never valued you as a whole person, you can stop grieving what never truly existed. They didn't discard you. They discarded the role you played, and when you stopped performing the way they wanted, when you stopped sacrificing your truth to please their ego, they didn't try to meet you halfway. They didn't ask how they could grow with you. They replaced you like an object, like a possession, like a battery that ran out of charge, because to them people are resources, not relationships, and that's why the discard feels so inhuman. Because it is, one day you're everything to them, idealized, praised, celebrated, and the next you're nothing. They ghost you, block you, replace you, smear you, all without a second thought, because it was never about who you were. It was about what you gave, your energy, your loyalty, your attention, your emotional reactions. And when you stopped giving what they needed, they moved on to the next person who would. But here's the deeper truth. There's no one who can truly replace you. Not because you're a source, but because you're a soul. You are not a tool. You are not a supply. You are not a mirror to someone else's illusion. You are you, real, radiant, imperfect, and powerful. But narcissists don't want that. They don't want real. Real is messy. Real has boundaries. Real calls out lies, and they can't control real. They want reflections. They want compliance. They want fans, not partners. And when you stopped cheering for their dysfunction, when you stopped applauding their abuse with your silence, they turned cold. They called you selfish, difficult, overreactive, but what they were really saying was, you stopped serving my ego, and now I don't know what to do with you. They don't discard because you were too much. They discard because you were too real, because your soul began to demand reciprocity, because your intuition started asking questions, because your heart said, I deserve more than breadcrumbs and chaos. And that terrified them. So they fled, like cowards hiding behind charm and blame, and still, you stand, broken maybe, but still breathing, still healing, still rising. You see, narcissists are collectors, not of people, but of attention, admiration, obedience. You were a trophy in their world, proof to others of their worth, but the moment you needed something real, emotional depth, responsibility, authentic love, they backed away, because they don't have the capacity to give what they demand to receive. They want devotion without sacrifice, control without compromise, worship without work. So when they discarded you, it wasn't because you failed. It was because you evolved. You stepped out of the role they wrote for you. You stopped feeding the monster. You stopped prioritizing their needs over your own healing, and they couldn't handle that. Because to them, people who see through the script are dangerous. People who wake up become enemies. But let me say this clearly. You are not disposable. You are not defined by someone else's inability to love. Their blindness is not your burden. Their neglect is not your reflection. Their discard is not your identity. You are worthy of love that doesn't ask you to shrink, to beg, to bleed for the bare minimum. And if someone couldn't see that, that says everything about them. And nothing about you. You gave, you showed up. You tried, and now you heal. Now you reclaim. Now you remember that being treated like a supply does not mean you are one. You are a force. You are light. You are spirit wrapped in fire. And anyone who treats you like an option has no business standing in your presence. Not anymore. Let them go. Let them search for their next fix. Because you've outgrown that world. You're building something deeper now: authenticity, self-trust, boundaries, alignment. You're learning that love without respect is manipulation. That attention without intimacy is control. That admiration without accountability is a scam. And you don't do scams anymore. This is your rise. This is your roar. This is the moment you stop seeing yourself through the eyes of someone who never truly saw you at all. You are not broken. You were never too much. You simply outgrew the cage, and now you fly. So yes, they discarded you, but what they really did was set you free. From discarded to delivered, so here you are. At the end of a storm that was never yours to carry. You've stared into the face of manipulation. You've walked through the fire of betrayal. You've questioned your worth, your sanity, your strength. And yet, you are still standing, not broken, not weak, but reborn. The discard wasn't the end of you. It was the unmasking of them. It revealed the truth that you were never truly loved, only used, not because you were lacking, but because you were overflowing, with empathy, with loyalty, with love. They mistook your goodness for weakness, but now they see. They left behind something they will never find again. You were not discarded because you were small. You were discarded because you grew too big for their game. Too aware, too awake, too real. You stopped feeding the illusion, and in doing so, you stepped into your truth. And that was your liberation. Yes, it hurts. Yes, it shook you. But pain has a purpose. It shakes the lies from your soul. And every tear you cried was a baptism. Every silent night was a resurrection. Every time you almost called, almost begged, almost went back, but didn't. That was your rebirth. They tried to erase you, but all they did was release you. And now you rise, no longer for their validation, no longer for their attention, but for your own freedom, for your peace, for your healing, for your future. You are not what they said you were. You are not crazy. You are not too emotional. You are not hard to love. You are not weak. You are not disposable. You are a warrior disguised as a giver. You are a light wrapped in scars. You are the storm they never saw coming. Now you take your power back. You rewrite your story. You surround yourself with truth, with boundaries, with people who see you, not just what they can take from you. Because this is your time. This is your turning point. This is the chapter where the hero rises not from applause, but from ashes. Let the narcissist chase their next source. Let them repeat the same cycle with someone else. Because you're done with surviving. You're ready to thrive. You are no longer supply. You are no longer silent. You are no longer theirs. You are free. You are whole. You are enough. And you will never, ever be discarded again.